your perspectives as he speaks here today. Obviously, keep asking the volunteers for post-its if you want to post something outside at the end of the session. Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, I'm sure a lot of you know of him already. He's a very, very inspiring speaker, a physician by training, who moved to, who was in public service for over 16 years before he created this very outstanding party called the Lok Satta party. He is currently member of the Legislative Assembly from the Kukatpalli constituency of Andhra Pradesh. In spite of very impressive personal achievements, Dr. Narayan resigned from the IAS in 1996 so that he could work on grassroots movement for good governance and form the Lok Satta party at that time. Dr. Narayan has often spoken about the efficacy of reforms in the governance, the economy of Andhra Pradesh, among several other issues on various platforms. Dr. Narayan is well known for his role in bringing about electoral reforms and the Right to Information Act. He has also written columns in various newspapers. He has hosted television shows and has been a very outstanding TED speaker for those of you who have been able to access his very inspiring TED Talk. Put your hands together to join me in welcoming Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan.
This country's future in a very responsible way, in a very practical way, but in a very optimistic way. And that's the reason why I came here actually. When Ellen Dodi invited me, I was actually hesitating. Is there a purpose to this? Apart from the fact that I was really uncertain about my ability to spare time. Is there a purpose to it? And I thought there is one meaningful purpose that we could all accomplish, and that is to look at India's future with unvarnished eyes. Because when you look at India, there are two extreme views prevailing today. One is the irrational exuberance. Oftentimes, the 9% growth rate sustained in 20 years' time will become superpower A. The other is this enormous sense of desperation and prevailing pessimism. I think we should try and see that these two extremes are avoided. A balanced appreciation of what is possible, what is realistic, where we are wrong, what are our strengths, and how do we go forward, taking advantage of the opportunities that are available to us. And that, I think, is a way forward, really. And with that in mind, I'll share a few perspectives, because all of us know really what's wrong, what's right in this country, what we all hope, and what we all dream. Let's think of the successes first. Why should there be any room for optimism in this country? Oftentimes when we look at this country, we see this as a frozen picture. In reality, life is a motion picture. There's a historical process in operation. Many countries across the world faced very similar problems 70, 100, 150 years ago. And almost the language is substantially similar to what we use in this country about the perils of India. Corruption, machine politics, manipulation, abject poverty, arbitrariness. All these are not unusual. They're not Indian. They are universal. They are part of the human condition. But they overcame them. They did not really wallow in self-pity. They said, look, let's do something about it. And they systematically addressed those problems by changing incentives and therefore human behavior, by creating mechanisms for better collective enterprises and endeavors, and ensuring that there is a better synergy and therefore better outcomes over a period of time. I don't want to go into historical details because given the time frame, it's difficult to really go into a lot of details, but whatever I'm saying, I can guarantee you there is a wealth of evidence to support that. It suffices for the time being. In 1947, when we became free, or in 1950, when we gave ourselves a constitution, please remember the conditions. Abject poverty, a very high level of illiteracy, a high degree of centralization, and incapacity to access even the simplest of services from the state. These were the four unique conditions in which we gave ourselves democracy. No country on earth dared to give itself democracy before us with those conditions. And from day one, we gave ourselves universal franchise. Please remember, the United States took from 1792 to 1920s to give women the voting rights. Though the black people were given the voting rights notionally by 1870s, in reality it became operational only in the 1960s. Please remember, Britain took about 4 centuries to give women the vote. Only in the 1920s, British women got the vote. From day one, in a country ridden by so much of caste and region and religion and prejudice against women and all kinds of iniquities, we gave ourselves universal franchise with abject conditions. It's not an easy thing to operate. And then look at what we accomplished. I'll mention only 2 accomplishments. We could talk of many, but 2 mega accomplishments, unprecedented in human history. Look at Italy. Italy has 9 Italian-speaking provinces. And it took 23 years of great statesmanship and struggle between 1843 and 1871 to unify 9 Italian-speaking provinces of the same religion, Catholic, Christian, same skin color, same literature, same language, same geography. And look at Germany. 39 German-speaking provinces, all of the same religion except for the state of Bavaria, where Catholic religion is dominant, elsewhere it's Protestant religion. Same language, same culture, same skin color, same everything otherwise. They're indistinguishable. And yet 9 years of blood and iron under Bismarck and the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives were necessitated to unify Germany. Look at what was accomplished in India even in the first years, in the early years of India. In a country with unmatched diversity of language, caste, region, religion, everything that's conceivable, imaginable in the world exists in this country in terms of diversity. 540 princely states were unified and integrated in a period of about 15 months without a shot being fired except in the state of Hyderabad. Not a shot fired. And in Hyderabad too, fewer than 10 Indian soldiers died in the police action. Probably hundreds of the Nizam's soldiers died. Probably many more died in the unrest that followed rather than the army action. But it was a remarkable accomplishment. Oftentimes we forget how this country has achieved miracles. No other country can even dream of that. Look at another great accomplishment. In no other country in the world do we have so many languages. We all are comfortable, we are able to communicate because we speak in a language we all understand. English, which is not really our language to start with. But look at the bulk of the people of India. There is no Indian who can speak in his own native tongue and be understood by more than 40% of the people. That's in case of Hindi. In respect of all other languages, no more than 9 or 8 or 10% of people understand in the whole country. Look at the scenario of the world. Look at Sri Lanka, our neighbor. They just have 2 languages, a piddly country, a tiny country. Sinhala and Tamil. Because they did not know how to deal with them, they faced more than 25 years of strife and bloodshed, an enormous economic decline or stagnation, and political convulsion. And only today they are trying to pick up the pieces. Only because they could not accommodate one additional language. Look at Pakistan, created along with us. It's essentially the language and the cultural barrier that broke up Pakistan within 25 years of its formation. So Punjabi versus Bengali. Look at a country like Belgium, a tiny country, a rich country, relatively speaking, housed in the European Commission today. There are 2 language groups there, the Flemish people who speak the Dutch language and the French-speaking people, 55-45 roughly, or 60-40% population. And yet the tiny country is not able to form a government, a stable government for years despite elections because of the linguistic differences. Look at a very rich country like Canada. Just one province, Quebec, with one additional language of French. They're not able to reconcile, and almost every other year or alternative election, you talk about secession, referendum, this and that. You never know when the country is going to break up. And then look at India. I'm sure almost none of us can actually list all the languages listed in the constitution of this country, if they are suddenly asked. I'm sure none of us can recognize all these languages when somebody speaks them. Some we can recognize, many others we can guess. A few, I'm sure we have no clue. And yet, a remarkable federalism was built on this. India, which started as a more or less unitary country, union of states, which actually became federal largely because of the linguistic reorganization of states, which is a very peaceful operation, and the linguistic differences have not created a problem either economically or politically or socially. It's a miracle. It's a post-independence miracle, not merely the first generation, it happened subsequently. And that federalism, if anything, became stronger in the past 20 years, at a time when we are talking about decline in values and poor quality leadership. All this is true. And yet, in the last 20 years, this federalism is actually coming to own its own. The states are now much more powerful than ever before. They can preside over their own destinies. They can create examples of excellence, models to be replicated across the country. The point I'm making is, please view India from a historical prism. Don't view it as a snapshot. It is essentially a motion picture. Obstacles we have to navigate. Yes, we have messed up in quite a few areas. We all know that. It's self-evident. The point is we can easily overcome them if we have good sense. That's what education, organization, learning, and historical experience are about. Do we wallow in self-pity, or do we say, damn it, let's do the following things in order to set right this country's conditions and fulfill our potential? The choice is ours as a country. Mr. Vasudeva talked about what is the meaning of being a superpower. And he gave us a list of things. We all agree with that. And just to recap, nothing new, let me state briefly, what are the things that we're seeking? When we say we are going to be a superpower, is it that we are seeking 8,000 missiles, thermonuclear weapons, and ICBMs, and the ability to decimate the rest of the world? Certainly we do want a few missiles. I'm certainly not a nuclear pacifist. I'm a nuclear hawk when it's warranted, because after all, my country's prestige as well as security do demand that I have enough defense capability. But it's not really important beyond a point for the superpower status to have our place in the global community of nations. We are talking about the practical things. We are talking about economic growth. Unquestionably, no matter what anybody says, a country that has no economic growth and GDP cannot be a major power in the world today, cannot be a significant factor. So anybody who says economy is not important, there are many other spiritual things, well, I salute you, but I think you are not living in a practical world. We undoubtedly want economic growth, and that means not only growth rate, but the ability to contain the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit, which is a huge problem today. We simply are consuming more than we produce. No nation can afford that on a perpetual basis. We have to do something about it. Not everything is beyond our control. Yes, energy for the time being is a problem. Mr. Vasudeva explained how India is relatively poor in terms of conventional energy sources. But there are many other areas. We inflict damage to ourselves. There's no reason why we should buy every year $70 billion worth of gold in this country. It's ridiculous. So there are some things which can be changed by culture, by education, by understanding, by giving a greater sense of security. But most of all, we can easily produce a lot more. I don't understand why we should import every day 5 truckloads of mobile phones for 1 billion telephone strength in this country, because we don't produce one damn telephone in this country. It's a shame. That's where jobs come. That's where economic growth takes place. There's hardly any electronics industry producing manufactured goods in this country. That's the way forward. So economic growth and what it entails in terms of economic growth, I only listed 1 or 2 just to complete the picture. We all agree. But that's not sufficient. We are looking at access to amenities. You ask anybody in Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad, in a village, in a district town, water supply, sewerage, garbage disposal. Yesterday I had to spend 2-3 hours about a garbage disposal issue. And tomorrow, right from the airport, actually I requested the organizers to change my airline, only to go early in order to participate in a dharna, so that the garbage is properly disposed. Because what should be taken for granted in a civilized society is a huge problem in our country. Basic amenities, the quality of life, that emanates from ensuring those amenities are available and access to services are available. And the third is, sometimes many of us in gatherings like this, oftentimes we forget it. Unless we end the inequality by birth, not in terms of outcomes, but in terms of opportunities, we cannot ever be a major power in the world. If 70% of Indians, their future is determined at the time of birth because of the circumstances of birth, because of the accident of the womb, and they have no chance, no matter how bright they may be, endowed in terms of nature or God, no matter how hard they're willing to work, if the society does not give them opportunities to rise and be with us in the next generation, then that country is not worth living in. That country is not a superpower if we have all the wealth in the world. I'm not opposed to inequalities per se, but I'm totally, unalterably opposed to inequality of opportunity because of the circumstances of birth. It's an insult to humanity. And in that respect, we are about the worst in the world. The structural inequality by which opportunities are denied to the bulk of the people only because of the circumstances of birth and the pretension that we are better than them, just because we are born more lucky. That ought to be changed. Please never forget that important issue, because as long as that is a problem, you will have strife, you will have violence. It's not merely a spiritual or a moral issue. It's a practical issue. It's going to undermine all of us. The rest of the society is going to be brought down because we haven't given adequate hope and opportunity to the rest of the people. Justice in a fundamental sense is vital for society's growth and stability. And the fourth one, harmony in society, because disharmony can be a result of not merely inequalities, but because of our meaningless divisions. Caste, reservation, no reservation, this caste, that caste, etc. We see it every day in the country. Language, water resources, something else. Now in my state, region, Telangana or something, what the hell is the problem? Nobody understands, nobody knows. It doesn't matter. It's easy to provoke people, to make people aroused against each other. If in Germany, Hitler could make German people believe that the small Jewish population is actually the enemy, and then created a psychosis and the whole world war on account of that, well, it's so easy to do that in our country. In every state you can create another Germany of the pre-war time. Caste versus caste, religion versus religion, even party versus party, faction versus faction. It's so easy to manufacture those problems and create an artificial enemy and say, he is the cause of your problem. Not you and your hard work and your ability or your innovation, but he is the cause of the problem. Decimate him and you're okay. All your problems can be answered by that one simple solution. It's so easy. I'm sure Mumbai city is not a stranger to this. There are quite a few demagogues who have done it and who are doing it. And every part of India is learning from these things. It is these four essential things. If we really want to fulfill our potential as a nation, that we see. What can we do about them? The problems, the challenges, again, self-evident, but again, for the purpose of completion of the discussion, I'll just mention them diagraphically. Infrastructure, all of us know that. The power sector is a mess, energy sector is a mess, and our transport sector is a mess. Particularly the growing urbanization, we all know the kind of impediments that we face. Education and skills, Mr. Vasudev talked about it at some length, but please understand. Merely because all our children are enrolled in schools doesn't mean they're getting education. I'm not talking about skills and employability also, that's even a higher order thing. Even a simple sense of what education is, even helping them fulfill their minimal potential, that doesn't exist. I don't know how many of you have heard of PISA. How many of you have heard of PISA? The Program for International Students Assessment. It's an OECD program for a long time, but recently they've included emerging economies to measure the outcomes of school education at the age of 15. India is included in that, not present survey, the survey before that, 2009, out of 74 countries. Can anybody guess what India's rank is?
73.
I asked for the people who would guess, not who would know. Our self-image is we will be somewhere 5, 10, 15, 20, at least mid-30s. But we are 73rd out of 74 nations at the age of 15, and they only measured basic linguistic ability to communicate, and simple math and logic. Not science, not formulae, not complicated stuff, universal stuff they measured. We are lucky that there's a country called Kyrgyzstan, which is included in the survey because they got the last place. Otherwise, India would have had that very terrible, dubious distinction. And you know which is the number one country? China. Not United States, not Britain, not Japan, not Germany. China. Now, it's both a distressing signal and also a very hopeful signal. Distressing because we deserve something much better. We're doing pretty bad. Hopeful because if China could do it, it doesn't require a huge amount of resources. It doesn't require fantastic technology. It requires will and skill and passion. And here is the good news. The demand side is extremely strong in India. There is probably greater demand for education, healthcare and many other things in this country than elsewhere in the world. In Britain, when they increased the university fees to about £3,000 per student, £3,000 per student per annum, there were riots in the streets of London. It was a politically huge and unpopular thing to go to Oxford or Cambridge. In India, even at the primary school level, a rickshaw puller is willing to spend way beyond his means to give his children a head start. The demand side is extremely strong. They have tremendous civilizational strength. It's the supply side that stinks to high heavens. We can easily set it right if only we alter the incentives. It's not a problem. We're not Africa. We're not even Britain where people are not willing to pay. We're India where people really are willing to sacrifice anything and everything for the next generation. We are superb families. One of our greatest and enduring strengths, family as an institution. It's just that we messed up. Not only the government, the universities, the educational establishments, all of us together, we simply messed up. But we can set it right so easily. Centralization. People of our class in particular, people who wear nice clothes, a jacket and tie, and speak English, we love centralization. Because that's when we access the bureaucracy at the top, the politicians at the top, English language newspapers, but you can never become a great nation if you want to centralize the country. Believe me. No nation on earth became great by over-centralization, not in the modern era. Maybe in the Roman Empire, yes. Maybe Egyptian Empire, but not in the modern era. Show me one country. Impossible. Then, of course, the problem of rule of law. If you ask me to identify the two great challenges of India, challenge of keeping pace with urbanization and the challenge of rule of law. Because the social controls were adequate. Everybody knew everybody else. Khandan was important. Somebody's son or daughter, if she misbehaved, he misbehaved, there's a price to pay socially, and therefore societal controls were adequate. And state control was hopeless, but was not necessary. But today, with greater impersonal behavior, greater urban migration, greater modernization, unless the state actually is able to enforce rule of law fairly, justly, efficiently, effectively, we have a huge problem. We oftentimes take it for granted. We have a huge crisis in the country. Rule of law does not merely mean order, it means fairness and equity, equality before law, but efficient delivery at the same time. And of course, how can you ignore elections, politics, and corruption? And we must shed much of our hypocrisy if we want to address that. The other day, one of the politicians in Mumbai or Maharashtra, Monday, all he said was that he spent 8 crores to get elected. Instead of all of us sitting and saying, look, what can we do to improve this situation? We cannot afford this kind of corrupt election where vote buying is common and illegitimate expenditure and lying through the teeth. This has to give way to something more sensible. Instead of looking at it that way, what have we done? A cynical, self-serving, perfunctory, hypocritical exercise. The Election Commission gives a notice and we have front page headlines. Knowing full well that 99.9% of the legislators in India are elected by spending 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 crores of rupees each of them. We all know that. Prime Minister Vajpayee said it umpteen times in Parliament. People like me have been shouting from rooftops in the past 16, 17 years. We all know that. But we pretend that there is one isolated aberration. If we simply wrap this fellow on the knuckles and shut him up, the problem is solved. That's not the way to become great. Sorry. You become great as an individual or as a nation because you acknowledge problems and overcome them. You design institutions and create incentives to alter human behavior and get better outcomes. That's how you become great. You don't become great by being namby-pamby. You don't become great by being pussyfooted. You don't become great because you're a hypocrite or you're a liar. You become great because you transcend the human condition. You create a vision for the people and make people understand that that vision is not beyond your reach and there are ways of reaching there, and inspire people to collectively endeavor to reach that destination. That's the hallmark of greatness. Not this namby-pamby, hypocritical, perfunctory exercise. I'm sorry for using short words, very sharp words. Sampath is my colleague. I succeeded him twice in government, so he's a great personal friend, nothing personal. But what's being done by the Election Commission is, I can't really find any better words, it's hypocritical. As I said, there are many positives. Demand side is very strong, I already mentioned that. The rise of the states, today you have beacons. Now the whole country's decline or problems do not really visit upon the states. You can have islands in each state. You can now each state can compete. Suddenly in the past 20 years that has happened. One of the great improvements in the country, technology. Let me give a couple of illustrations. Only the last week I learned of something very exciting. To me, that's very exciting because the DRDO scientists, they've isolated a bacterial strain from Antarctica. Now, this is a unique strain that can digest human waste, the night soil, within hours. It can be a radical solution to India's sanitation problems because almost any overseas visitor who comes to India, the first thing that strikes them, the first thing that's most ugly, unhygienic, and insanitary, unhealthy, and very offensive is the public defecation and the night soil everywhere. Here is a fantastic technology available. And what I was discouraged to learn again in the same last week was, it was Lakshadweep and Meghalaya that were in the forefront of this, not Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, none of them, because none of us see this as a problem. But we have an answer. We have many answers like this. I'm just giving one example. You take congenital abnormalities. Every year in this country, about 250,000 children are born with preventable congenital abnormalities. If you actually take the total number of congenital abnormalities, about 5% of all births, and that is about a much larger number, about 16 or 70,000 or more. But I'm talking about preventable congenital abnormalities, about 200,000 to 250,000 minimum. If you simply, and most of these abnormalities are because of a disease called rubella, German measles, when the mother, during pregnancy, she gets this infection, which is pretty harmless for the mother. Nothing happens except a few rashes and some fever for a couple of days. But the child is born with either blindness or deafness, and therefore dumbness, or limbs not formed, or heart disease, or a combination of these. 250,000 children. If you want to do something for them later, A, in most cases you can do very little. B, it's hugely expensive. Now supposing you want to prevent these congenital abnormalities and have healthy babies, all these 200,000, how much does it cost? All you require is a vaccine against rubella, which costs no more than 15 or 20 rupees, because the combined vaccine for mumps, measles and rubella is only costing about 70 rupees in the market and retail. But if you have only one disease, and in bulk, probably the cost will be 10 to 15 rupees. A tried and tested vaccine is available, and all of us actually, we ensure that our children get it. The pediatrician ensures that, but it's not part of the public vaccination program. How much will it cost for all the country? It will cost about 20 or 30 crores a year. Let alone the country's budget. If you ask Mr. Vasudeva from ONGC, he'll say 15-20 crores, I'll write a check today as part of corporate social responsibility. Money is not a problem. And yet, 250,000 children are born every year with preventable congenital abnormalities. What should be great economic and social assets have become liabilities. And if you want to address even minimally, it costs at least 100 times more for this country. We are uniquely privileged because you are in the first generation in human history when we have the technology and the resources to fulfill most of our dreams, fulfill much of human potential, and eliminate most of the avoidable suffering. If you really want to choose when you should live, I would say this is the best of all times. We are lucky. We are so privileged because so much more can be accomplished, but only if you are wise, if you are sensible. The problem is not resources or technology. The problem is wisdom. The problem is the will. The problem is the passion and the drive and the dynamism. If you don't even dream, the Sanskrit sloka says, Omkara parivrittam vishwam. Sankalpa parimitam drishyam. If sankalpa, if that will, if that is very limited, then your world is very limited. You can never become great. The problem is not with resources and technology. I'm not saying we have unlimited resources. I'm not an idiot. Well, my wife believes I am. But I do believe that I'm not too much of an idiot at least. Resources are important. Nobody has unlimited resources. No country has that. Not America, not China. But we have reasonable resources of all kinds together. We have technology. We have opportunities. We're underperforming, not because we don't have them. We simply don't have some culture. Demography. A great advantage. Could be also a great liability. Mr. Vasdeva said, what is a demographic dividend could easily become a demographic nightmare if we mishandle it, and already we've begun to mishandle it, and the window of opportunity is closing. We were discussing this morning, Mr. Mali and I. Every year we're adding about 12 million people for the working age population, whereas China is actually losing about 3.5 million people a year. And if we know how to put them to productive use, and if we know how to restructure our economy to create these jobs and create wealth, and therefore goods and services for the people of this country and the rest of the world, most of our problems are over and we really fulfill our potential, but we're not doing enough. The opportunity exists, demographic dividend. Energy sector, Mr. Vasudeva is absolutely right. We are not very well endowed, but luckily, because others are now well endowed, the demand is now declining, and if India's saving grace would be, because the United States has developed now the fracking technology, and therefore the prices of oil can no longer be dictated by the Middle Eastern capital. The price will be much more moderate in the medium term. But more important, the non-conventional energies are now coming to the fore. Germany today has about 25 to 30% generation capability through solar power, though its actual generation is about 10 to 12% of the total grid, but which is remarkable. Or wind, or something else. A lot more things are happening, exciting things are happening to make these more economical, more effective. And finally, despite all the fractures and fissures in this country, the broader sense of unity and stability. There is a thread of unity in this society, in this country. And people don't go beyond a particular point, even in our riots or problems. There is a line they don't cross. It's not because of society, state. It's because of the societal regulations. These are our strengths. There is a reference to China. I'm happy that somebody brought that up. Oftentimes, we see ourselves in relation to China. I only want to address one particular question. Many people are very nostalgic or very wistful about China because they believe that China grew fast because of an authoritarian, autocratic model. Nothing is farther from truth. Just where they behaved democratically. China failed spectacularly wherever they behaved autocratically. Universal literacy and education of quality accessible to everybody is a democratic tool. Democracy does not merely mean elections and shouting from rooftops everywhere. It's a democratizing tool. Universal health care of reasonable quality available. Decentralization of power. China has far more decentralization than India can ever dream of at this point of time. Their cities, the local communities are totally locally governed within the broad confines of the national policy. We cannot even imagine that. Can you offhand tell me who the mayor of Mumbai city is? Or Delhi city is? Or Chennai? Or Kolkata? Or Hyderabad? There are local governments in this country. You can actually talk of Shanghai mayor today. Because they are the next great leaders of that country. Or Chengdu, or some other city. China is far more decentralized. It's again a tool of democracy. There's actually deliberative democracy tool applied in much of China today, in allocation of resources and taking of projects and so on and so forth. And technology transfer to rural areas. And job creation, that's a democratizing tool. You are spreading incomes. You made job creation your central policy plan. And where China behaved autocratically, there are two spectacular examples. One is the 1950s Great Leap China spectacularly declined. 20 million people died between 1958 and 61 because of starvation in China. It's not authoritarianism that delivers. It is sensible public policy and democratization. It's not democratization that fails. It is the confusion between democracy and chaos, freedom and license. Or 1968, the Cultural Revolution. 90% of Chinese cultural assets and their tradition, they were destroyed by bandits. Even Deng Xiaoping, his son, was actually dropped from the second floor, therefore he was permanently crippled in the Cultural Revolution. So don't be confused about what is the ingredient of success in these countries. We often think of Lee Kuan Yew, certainly he was a great leader and a benevolent leader at that, and I personally don't have any serious problem if within the broad confines of democracy will bring some order and strong leadership. But don't think that autocracy is a solution. Dictatorship is not a solution. It is sensible democratization, but with responsibility. That brings me to the question of leadership. If there is one deficit in the country, and that point came out in the discussion earlier, there is leadership deficit. Look at the leadership during the freedom struggle and subsequently first generation of India after freedom. We had leaders who actually led, who were far ahead of their times, far ahead of society. Look at leaders today. They are leaders who are willing to be led by the mobs. We say people want it and therefore I will offer this. I know it's wrong, but what do I do? They were leaders, these are laggards. These are not leaders. People who fall behind the public and the society, who cannot make people aspire for a bigger dream, they're not leaders. The word leaders is not applicable to them. People who can set a higher goal and take the people forward, they are the ones who are leaders. Today, they are laggards. They know how to win the votes, somehow or other, by hook or crook. That doesn't make people leaders. They were people who really built an aspiration. Even the aspiration of a united India was an unbelievable thing. An aspiration of universal franchise, an unbelievable thing. Today, these people lead by fear. They were talking about an adventure. They were talking about creating a climate and ambience to see that everybody has an opportunity. Today, it's about stagnation. Take a couple of examples. I was myself involved as a member of the National Advisory Council with this Employment Guarantee Act. Therefore, I see some merits in that. But ultimately, that cannot be a panacea for poverty in this country. That's not the way to create employment in the 21st century. You cannot dig pits and fill pits. That can just be a temporary social security measure whenever there is a difficulty on account of seasonal conditions or some other problems. And we pretend that we've done something fantastic. India's poverty is eradicated. Now we have created jobs. What does food security talk about? 90% of all rural people, 50% of all urban people are starving thanks to the misgovernance of these fellows for 60 years. And therefore the state now has to procure and provide food for 72% of Indian population. Nobody is even challenging these assumptions. We're all acknowledging it, accepting it. And now, what should be a fringe issue has become a mainstream issue in the country. And if somebody opposes it, you are opposing feeding the starving people. Leadership not leading, lacking. Leadership is looking at the votes that come as a result of it, in the hope that somehow people are very grateful to you because you gave them 2 morsels of food that day and they vote for you. But people of India are far ahead of that. There's a terrible crisis of leadership in every which way in this country. Just because you're articulate doesn't make you a good leader. True leadership is, again, aspirational, inspirational. It leads people. It's far ahead of the people in society. Sometimes it pays a price. If you're too far ahead, yes, there's a price to be paid. So be it. But you don't lag behind society. You're not pulled and pushed by the people, screaming and kicking, and then do what is necessary, much too late and much too little. That's not leadership. That's exactly what's happening in India today. We have to set right these things. Let me come to the concluding part. But if we want to set right, we must look at institutions with a very dispassionate eye, with a very objective eye, and find solutions. I was very disappointed when Mr. Sadasivan, the Chief Justice Designate of India, in his first comments, he said, the judicial appointments are perfectly all right. There's no need for a National Judicial Commission. Where are you coming from? From Mars? From Jupiter? Judicial appointments in India stink, among other things. Each of us wants reform in something else. A politician waxes eloquent about the business sector reform, the corporate sector. The bureaucracy talks about political reforms. The judiciary talks about everybody reforming, but nobody wants reform for himself. We must have an objective assessment of our strengths and weaknesses. There must be a meaningful approach to this, not status quoist, self-serving approach, creating permanent priesthoods. Election Commission, I already mentioned Gopinath Munde's episode as an example of that. Now, in this context, I believe if we focus on a few things, they are again self-evident, and if we find the levers of change, we can dramatically alter the landscape, not in the next 30, 40 years, but in the next 10 years. It will not happen in 1 year. Don't expect miracles. I'm asking for big change. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm not a great believer that a God sitting there will suddenly say, from tomorrow India will be Eldorado. I don't know if there is a God. Even if there is a God, I don't think He will help us if we don't help ourselves. So practical change, but significant change, mega change. Education, I already mentioned. Demand side is very strong with a few critical inputs and the right kind of levers as incentives. There will be dramatic outcomes. Instead, they have made a mess of Education Act. With due respects, Mr. Vasudevan, Right to Education Act is a disaster. We must never confuse symbolism with outcomes. We must never confuse articulation of an issue with substance, activity with achievement. Right to Education Act is a classic example. In the past 5 years after this law came into effect, the educational outcomes at school level actually have declined. And I'm not saying it casually. I'm speaking with evidence. Because word outcome does not even find place in the architecture of Right to Education Act. Just look at the law. It's all about supply. And they don't even understand how to supply. You have today a school within 100 meters, 200 meters, 500 meters. You have in every state thousands of schools with fewer than 10 kids. Ramshackle things which we call schools is an insult. If you don't have an institutional environment, where is school, where is education? Where is accountability, peer review? You have hundreds of thousands of teachers in every state. You have a handful of people who are monitoring education. Education inspectors, or monitors, or people who guide, who handhold, who mentor. Practically none. They're spending tens of billions of rupees, 19,000 rupees per capita, per child per year, which is not a small amount, which is not big enough, yes, but 19,000 rupees per annum per child is not a small amount. In some cases, 25,000, 30,000 rupees per child in government schools. But there simply is no monitoring, no accountability systems. I can go on and on. That becomes an educational seminar. But the point is, it's a classic example of how much a mess there is in that sector. School education and higher education both. We understand the levers of change. Rule of law, we have to create independent crime investigation so that the gunda of today and the mafioso of today does not have the temptation to become the ruler of tomorrow. Because even if you're a ruler, you must not escape the clutches of law. The law must be both just and efficient and fair, equitable to all. It's not beyond our capacity. We just require institutional mechanisms. I don't want to go into details of how to do it. Because again, each one is a complex, detailed subject. But we can do it. We can do it quickly. And the results will flow very quickly because the society demands it already. There is a huge demand in the country. We're just not leveraging it. Decentralization of power. Not merely as a utopian ideal of Gandhi, but as a democratic tool. And as a fiscal tool. Much of the fiscal problem in India is because of centralization of power. Because people don't see what this money is doing and therefore they want freebies. What is the problem of politics today? Vote buying. 2, the freebies. 3, divisions manufactured for political gains. Now all these are directly linked to centralization. Because what you do is not really yielding dividends to me. You give me money in return for the vote. Because I don't see any other value for the vote. Because I'm not willing to pay more taxes or accept reduced subsidies because in a centralized system, I don't find alternative use for that money. And therefore, in Telugu we have Chachinadu Pelliku Chinde Katnam. For a dead man, whatever dowry comes, it's welcome. And anyway, there's nothing that comes from the state, I might as well get some money for the vote. But if actually I get some delivery at a local level, and if there's greater accountability, then I forget all these things. I really want better life. Only locally it's possible, and it's sensibly structured. And only locally, authority can really be fused with accountability. People know exactly who will do what. And therefore punish them or reward them for their behavior. And only locally, because my life and my family are more important than my caste, my religion, my region, everything. Nothing is more important than my kids. I will actually measure the outcomes in terms of my family. Therefore, this politics of individuation instead of primordial loyalties, which are the cause of these divisions in politics in this country. So in a sensible but accountable manner. I'm not expecting locally some great Gandhian heroes. I'm expecting ordinary human beings. But change incentives and hold them to account and yet empower them locally. Deny them these alibis. Then the Naxalites become the local leaders in the village. They won't become the enemies of the country or the society. Most of the terrorists in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, when the local elections were held 2 years ago in 2011, 78% people voted peacefully. In a state where to get 10% polling in assembly parliament election is a miracle, with a lot of bloodshed at that, with hundreds of thousands of security men, 78% people voted with hope peacefully. And a priceless opportunity was squandered by our people. I met the Prime Minister at the time and pleaded with him, give 1,000 rupees per capita in every Kashmiri village and tell them, now you take care of your destiny, all your local things, your water supply, your road, your drain, your street lighting, your parks, they're all now yours, this is the money. The Prime Minister could have easily written that check with the left hand. What is 1,000 crores, 1,500 crores to solve the problem of Kashmir? Instead we bung it. And Kashmir insurgency is again resurfacing because of our failure. The solutions exist if we know how to intelligently apply them to suit our conditions. Skills and jobs, in addition to education itself, again, there was a discussion, so I will not go into that, but job creation. Mere skilling is not sufficient, it's necessary. But we have to create enterprises that create jobs. We are creating enterprises that create profits, but not jobs. We have to go into manufacturing sector in a big way. No large economy of India's size and diversity can prosper and create jobs without manufacturing sector becoming much more important than it is today. Today, nobody wants to enter manufacturing because most of the corruption is in indirect taxes related to manufacturing. Most infrastructure problems in manufacturing. The residual license raj in manufacturing. So who would want to enter manufacturing if you want to make money and have ambition? We made it impossible for people of good sense to come into manufacturing. We have to create all these conditions to make manufacturing one of the essential engines of economic growth. So that job creation takes place and current account deficit can come down. And we can create a healthcare system which our people deserve. Britain in 1948, at a time of massive rationing, when if you ate egg, it was a crime because egg was not available for the people. It was only for the soldiers and a few. If you simply ate egg at home, somehow you bought it in the black market, you were a criminal, you were put in jail. Those were the conditions. There was abject poverty, rationing, technology was primitive related to this thing. And yet, Britain built one of the most enduring and effective systems of healthcare, National Health Service, in 48. And today, 65 years later, we can do much better. Again, I don't want to go into detail. We can easily do that. Today, the pain that most people, the poor people, pay in this country, even the middle classes, the pain they suffer in this country on account of lack of health care is something unimaginable. It's one of the greatest sins in this country, that avoidable suffering. All these can be done with our resources and our technology. And there is a consensus available if you know how to build a consensus, because nobody is opposed to them. But somebody, and not one somebody, but thousands of somebodies in every sector must stand up and look at India with a fresh eye and say, damn it, let's get this done. My hope is that it's fora like this that will create that kind of energy, collective, informed assertion to help transform India and convert this angst, this ennui, this sense of desperation into something positive and creative, and something that can actually deliver, not in the distant future, 40, 50 years later, in the long time as somebody said we're all dead, but in the intermediate time. In the next 5 to 10 years, India can have all the ingredients to be a great superpower. It will not become a superpower instantly, but in 10 years' time, we can build all this and create the infrastructure to then become a superpower in the next 20 years after that. It's not beyond our capability. We have lost some time, but all is not yet lost. But if we simply wallow in self-pity, or if we have unrealistic expectations, then I'm afraid we will not perish as a country suddenly, but we'll continue to do what we're doing. We're good at it. This plodding and pushing and underperforming. They become an also-ran. Do you remember? There was a time when there was ABC of tennis, Amritraj, Borg and Connors. They were called ABC of tennis. What happened to Borg and Connors? What happened to Amritraj? Let's not become Amritraj. Let's be Borg and Connors. Thank you.
And I'm glad that people like you still exist in the country. I'm going to visit your website and see how I can contribute to your party, because I'm really inspired by what you said. I have 2 questions for you. You are currently an MLA under the system that you spoke about that doesn't work very well. Number 1, first question, how difficult is it for you as an MLA to get work done under the current system? That's number 1. And number 2, can you just throw light on probably 2 or 3 of your favorite initiatives that you've taken at an MLA level that have really seen a big impact, that have made you really happy?
It's excruciatingly painful, first of all, to get elected. Believe me, I am about the only, or at least one of the very few, there may be a few states like Kerala and Bengal where actually big money is not required to get elected, but definitely not Andhra Pradesh, not Maharashtra, not Karnataka, not Tamil Nadu, increasingly not Delhi, not Punjab, many, including Kashmir. Even in Jammu and Kashmir, I was told that the National Conference paid 500 rupees per vote in the last election, and PDP paid 300 rupees per vote. And that is when I was absolutely certain that Kashmir would never secede from India. I thought the terrorism, this language, this religion, and other things, I thought, good, bad, ugly, money is not an issue in elections. But once I realized that was the case, then I was confident. I spent about 4.9 lakhs or so to get elected. But it's virtually impossible, except for a very select few. High degree of credibility, a lifetime of service and record of service and visibility, and the trust that you built over a period of time, not merely one day's media manipulation, but over a period of time, because people have seen it. That opportunity is available to very few, and people with such opportunities actually can succeed hugely in life. They can become the next billionaires, they can do practically anything they like in government or outside. Why should they really go through this mess? You know, there's a beautiful Telugu poem about Yudhishthira and all the Pandavas entering the Virata's court. I mean, these mighty Pandavas going to Virata's court. Kunjara Yodhambo Doma Kuptika Chochan. It's like an elephant's trunk entering Doma is machar, mosquito's throat. It really is humiliating in many senses, because our legislators don't do, or not expected to do, what a legislator should be doing. A legislator simply does not legislate in our country, parliament or state legislature. He is seen as a disguised executive who has to deliver somehow without any authority. Therefore, informal, illegitimate authority should be exercised in order to deliver something and get the voters' appreciation. It's a huge task. But it still can be done. Not by many people, I'm afraid, at this point in time, unless you change the nature of politics. I didn't really discuss that because there's no time. I'll come to that a little later. Some incentives, for instance, as a legislator, the drinking water, the simple things we did, some system improvements. For the proportion of population in my constituency, they are entitled to get X amount of drinking water. I'm not even asking for more water than what is available. I'm asking for my rightful share. It should be about 18 or 20 MGD, 18 MGD or so, for my people in the constituency. They were getting actually 8 when I was elected. Today, the number has gone up to about 14 mg. Not good enough, but a huge improvement, almost a quantum improvement by systematic efforts. Traffic is a nightmare in a growing economy anywhere in cities, and my constituency is one of the fastest growing ones. It's a large constituency of about 78 lakh population for an assembly constituency. And most of the traffic problems on the national highway and other things, in a systematic manner, it's a Herculean task, very painful task. It took me 3 years to get one road overbridge over the railway track built in one of the most progressive areas of Hyderabad city, because the railways and the city authorities, they were fighting tough wars. So Dr. Cotton built an aqueduct across Godavari River 150 years ago in just one working season. Professor Rao would know, as a person from Andhra Pradesh. 140 years ago, there was no soil suitable for brick making locally. There were no skilled workers locally. There was no road transport. There was no rail. Everybody has to be ferried. And Godavari was in flood 6 months in a year. Rest of the 6 months backwaters are there. And there was no concrete, no technology, no steel and concrete, only lime mortar. And Cotton completed the aqueduct 1 kilometer across Godavari in just one working season. And our fellows today are taking for a small bridge across a Nala 4 to 5 years. So we have really messed up the systems. In the face of that, results have to come. Therefore, the transport improvement has taken place there. For the whole city, one of the big solutions to drinking water problem is Krishna water. You can easily lift the water, it's relatively close, already 2 phases are in operation, therefore we tried and tested method. Instead, the government has gone for a Godavari River project where there is no assured water. Unlike irrigation, for drinking water, there has to be assured water. You can't even have 10% doubt. You can't say, sorry, this year there's no water. You can't. I mean, it has to be 100% assured. The government, for their own reasons, have gone for a very costly, ineffective, and very unsure project. And single-handedly, I had the privilege to fight and win the battle and get a 3rd phase sanction for Krishna, for Hyderabad city, Krishna phase 3 with 1,500 crores. And it would not have happened but for the intervention of Kokatpalli constituency people and the representation that they've given me. And now that's under progress. It will be completed in the next 9 months or so. As a legislator, I could prevent a horrid law from happening. The Societies Act, which is a liberal law during British time and subsequently. They wanted to make it a liberal law with government control completely in Andhra Pradesh. I didn't have numbers. I was the lone legislator for my party. But sometimes one man with conviction or one woman with conviction is a majority. And the passion with which you fight based on logic and reasoning and evidence and sound legal principles, it persuaded the whole House, and the government, though it had brute majority, had no moral authority to bring that before the House. They're just waiting for me to leave, and suddenly they'll make it a law. But as long as I'm there, they dare not bring that as legislation. Some significant initiatives are possible, but you must understand. You must leverage. You must realize. At the end of the day, after all this, is it spectacular? No. It's way better than most others because we are underperforming as a country. If what we require is 100 in a well-functioning system, what a good bureaucrat or a good politician can deliver is no more than 20 on a scale of 100. Sometimes actually, oftentimes it's 10. Because somebody does 40 or 45, we are eulogizing them. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi one day asked me, she said, look, I traveled in Raebareli constituency, my constituency for 5 days. And everywhere I went, people flocked and gathered around me and they gave petitions, made demands. If I tried to address one person's problem, 20 other voices would drown me out or drown him out. And then I go there and something else happens. I don't know what to do. At least in my case, because I have some power, I can talk to the union minister and say, get something done, and he can put a 1,000 crore project and they say, I have done something great. But what happens really? That's the right question. It's hell. We're underperforming only because we created structural rigidities. And both in terms of elections and bureaucratic management and decentralization of power and accountability, we have to disentangle this mess. And that's what Lok Satta is a movement. As a party, we are still very young, only 6 years old. Most of our work is as a movement for 17 years. Voter registration improvements, disclosure of candidate details. Lok Satta is a pioneer in all these areas. Your Right to Information Act, Saruna and I together we drafted that bill and got it enacted. the National Rural Health Mission, I drafted the whole document, and then I persuaded the national NAC as well as the Government of India to become, it's no longer nowhere what is necessary for the country, but a good start, for instance. Local courts law, the 91st Amendment to the Constitution, whereby the size of the Council of Ministers, the cabinets is now limited, is linked to the size of the lower house of the Assembly or Parliament. The anti-defection law tightening by the same Constitutional Amendment. 97th Amendment to the Constitution, whereby cooperatives are now liberalized. Under Article 19(1)(c) now cooperatives are added, therefore the right to form cooperatives, unfettered by bureaucratic controls, now exists. I can go on and on. At least 15 or 16 major changes happened because of the initiatives of Lok Satta movement. Not because we had huge numbers. We had sympathy of the millions, at least in some parts of India, but we had vote only of a few number, only a few 100,000 people. More vote would help, but even that limited thing, if you know how to leverage it, if you really have wisdom, if you know how to seize the opportunities, you can make it happen. A political funding reform law, in the face of Tehelka, instead of shouting from rooftop about what's wrong, we went to all the parties and said, look, please, let's use this as an opportunity to create a framework for legitimate political funding, create the right kind of incentives. All of them agreed, in ruling party and in opposition. By unanimous consent, a law was enacted, the 2003 law. So a lot can happen. From a legislator, from a businessman, from a bureaucrat, from a political party, but not if we go about the way we are doing today. That is the fundamental. But a lot can happen. Believe me, my optimism is genuine. With full realization of what is happening, I know the muck out there, I know the corruption out there, I know the disgrace out there, but it's genuine, it's real, it's based on solid experience and life's learnings.
A round of applause for that optimism. Audience, this is not very complimentary, but it's actually a question for you. Have Gen Y lost interest in leadership for entrepreneurial ventures? If so, how will this stop us from becoming a superpower? This is one question. I'm going to combine that with another question from Amit Shetty. Considering the youth's reluctance to so much as cast a vote, is it worth it to invest in the comforts of Gen Y within our country?
The first part I didn't understand.
The first part is, have Gen Y lost interest in leadership for entrepreneurial ventures?
I still didn't get the first word at all.
Has Generation Y, has Gen Y
Okay.
lost interest in leadership for entrepreneurial ventures? If so, how will this stop us from truly becoming a superpower in the future? Combined with another question that Amit Shetty has saying, considering,
okay.
yeah, because
I don't think that the young generation is deficient in a way. I must be honest. Every generation, as it becomes old and aged, there's a tendency to think that the young people are nuisance or useless. We were all hardworking, we were capable, we were good, we were fantastic. Then all of you young people should really stand up and ask one simple question. If you guys are so fantastic, why is the country in such a mess? Because you are the ones who really were in charge. We were not even born. So don't believe this nonsense. Every generation has this problem. There's a book called The Name of the Rose. Anybody has read it? Umberto Eco. It also came as a film with Sean Connery in the lead. It's really about something that happened in the Middle Ages in a monastery somewhere in Europe. The style is that of a young man who witnessed certain unique events and violent events in a monastery when he was young, at the age of 20, 25, at the feet of his great master, a great man of great wisdom and learning. And 50, 60 years later, as an old man, he was recounting those events. That was the basic style. And in that book, there are passage after passage which say, oh, in those days the world was noble, and people were spiritual and godly, and everything was fantastic, and today everybody is rotten, and there is no morality, there is no spiritualism, society has gone to dogs. Page after page, you see exactly what's discussed in India. It's not the generation that's the problem, it is us of the elder generation who still hold the levers of power, who is incapacity to create instruments for these people to fulfill their potential. Otherwise, the potential is phenomenal. They're brighter, they're smarter, they're more aggressive, they're more secure. What was the security we felt? Whether the ONGC chairman today or me, why did we go into government jobs? In my case, of course, not as a career because I was a doctor, I was angry with emergency, but even then, I thought of government as a means of doing something. But for most of it, government was the job. That's the only thing. Today, you all have a different vision. Government also was willing to work, but for a cause. We need to get out when you want it. Whereas many of my generation earlier, we held on to it like limpets. We were not really innovators. We were not really people who are willing to look at the whole world and look at our place in the world and leverage our strengths. So it's not the young generation that's at fault. Certainly, voting behavior in the middle classes and young people must improve. If the voting is erratic, if you want better outcomes, how can it be better? Tell me. We have to make this voting presence felt, because now, as incomes are rising, urbanization is growing, and young people's numbers are important, demographically and electorally, we must make them vote, persuade them to vote. That's why I am also a supporter of one illiberal policy, and that is compulsory voting system. Not that we can put people behind bars for not voting, but we can create some small incentives and disincentives. Dr. Rao and I were talking about that earlier. You can give some concession in municipal tax or something, or you can impose a penalty in terms of tax if you don't vote. It may not be big, but once there is that moral compulsion, the evidence all over the world shows that there is a 12 to 15% higher voting. As this group of people, instead of merely shouting from rooftops or India Gate or whatever, they actually start participating in political activity in a constructive and creative manner. Believe me, political parties and leaders have antennae which are very sharp. After all, what do they want? They have not taken a vow to destroy India. They have taken a vow to do whatever it takes to get into power and to stay in power. If they know that you guys are willing to vote and vote for certain values, then they will also change, believe me. The very Congress party, the epitome of corruption, one day it will say suddenly, look, past is past, let's now build a country which is corruption-free. Just as they said, the epitome of license permit Raj, one day they said, let's liberalize. So there's nothing permanent about it, because they want to get the votes. And it's for us to demonstrate that a certain set of beliefs and actions get our vote. And I believe young people must be persuaded or even pressurized.
Right. Right. Nothing close to that answer. One last question from the floor, and then we'll announce the break. Yeah, one last question from the floor.
Thank you.
Sam?
JP, always inspiring to hear you. I have a different opinion about your assessment of RTE as right to education, but I don't think my question is based on that. But I was curious about your repeated mention of decentralization, which most of them will agree with in principle. But the social inequities, which also you pressed on, which is kind of a centralized notion, right? Caste, or patriarchy that perpetuates gender inequity is a very centralized notion that runs through the body of society and human being. So how does the two sort of sit well together? Decentralization of opportunities on one hand, and centralized problems of caste and patriarchy. Example, how do these examples say, like your example of the suggestion to Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister to allocate decentralized funds, fantastic idea. But given the inequities in societies, how do them work?
We require decentralization precisely because there are inequities. See, look at caste. With the democratization, what happened? The politicians now have to quote the vote of every caste. That's why no genuinely sensible politician has any kind of caste or religious notions. It's only the foolish politicians who have that kind of approach. Because you want vote for everywhere. And therefore, once you create that compulsion locally, but you come out of the structural Indian society's rigidities, that means come out of the traditional village, but create a local government which is larger than village, because in a village, the oppressive power of tradition is much greater than democratizing power of the vote. But if you create a larger body where the people who are dealing with each other are not in this hierarchy for centuries, but there's a much larger organization, then the voting behavior will be different. And the politicians who seek their vote will behave differently. Ultimately, it will lead to politics of individuation from politics of primordial loyalties. Today, in a centralized system, primordial loyalty is the only thing. That's why the caste of the candidate is a very, very critical input. Almost everywhere. And if you are a serious politician, you can't ignore the caste dimension. It's foolish to say that India is suddenly casteless and colorless. It's not true. But if your performance in terms of what matters to me in my life or to my family is something that I can measure and I can therefore use my vote as an instrument to encourage certain behavior, then the caste is less important. As I keep reminding people, if I want to send my daughter to a school, I will not see whether the teacher is from my caste or not. I will see whether the teacher is a capable fellow who can actually give my daughter a head start. Not that caste is less important, but my daughter is more important to me than caste. If your wife has to go under a surgeon's knife, some emergency surgery is to be done, certainly I would not like to see the caste of the surgeon, but the competence of the surgeon, because my self-interest which actually dominates. Unless, of course, I want a cheap divorce. So, this is actually promoting politics of individuation in the face of the primordial loyalties promoted by the caste system and the centralized communities. Apart from that, fiscally, it's a very sound step. Because people, once they understand it's my resource, there are many multiple uses for these resources, then they make increasingly rational choices. Not everybody everywhere, but some people somewhere, that example spreads. If it's not my resource, which I can access anyway, then irrational and short-term benefits become the dominant theme. Therefore, freebies versus actually improvement of the quality of life. That happens only in a decentralized economy. Otherwise, whoever wants to pursue rational policies in this country, he is doomed to fail politically. That's a very sad thing. How do you make rational politics politically electable? You cannot say, you become a martyr and give up your life and do something for the country. It's ridiculous. Some people do it still, but that's not the way forward. You must recreate incentives in a manner that the right behavior actually is rewarded. And therefore, ultimately the real challenge of public life in India is, how do you make ethical and rational public life or politics sustainable? Today, unethical and irrational politics is eminently sustainable. It's not because all these parties are crooked that they reach there. It's because that's the only thing sustainable within the current mode. Our challenge is to prove that a different kind of politics is actually sustainable. Until that time, our finger pointing and abusing and accusing doesn't help. It only expiates our sense of guilt and makes us feel good and superior. It doesn't change the reality of India. You want to change the reality of India? There's a wealth of talent there and elsewhere. How do you redirect it? How do you recreate incentives? And sensible decentralization with accountability. I'm not a romantic. I know there's a lot of mess there. And it's not something I have not done it. I have done 200,000 acres of irrigation in one district in 2.5 years' time. A record forever in this country. I don't think anybody will ever break this in this country. It happened because I trusted people, I gave them the power, I gave them the opportunity, I made them partners, but I created incentives in such a manner that there's accountability which is inbuilt. And spectacular results too. If I worked as a civil servant merely, with all the power and resources at my command, my lifetime would not have brought those results. There is no substitute to that. I am absolutely certain, there's not an iota of doubt in my mind about this. What instruments are required to improve it? Yes, let's debate. But the basic concept, there is no substitute to empowering our people in a responsible way.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask you to take the rest of the questions offline. One more round of applause for the one and only Dr. JP of Lok Satta. Thank you to all the sir. This is great that we have something to give you on behalf of the LNOD Roundtable. May I request Akil